I look at how Kennedy and Johnson dealt with the emerging phenomenon of non-alignment in the Cold War, with states like India, Egypt, and Indonesia, and a whole vast range of others that had, in the first place, recently gained their independence, but also in the second place, declined to choose sides in the Cold War. I look at how Americans, who are often prone to dividing the world into with us and against us categories, deal with states that actually opt for none of the above. Kennedy embarked upon a fairly broad, ambitious, and often successful policy of engaging non-aligned states, of using shifts in U.S. policy, economic aid, and also presidential diplomacy. He was great at shaking hands and meeting people to reach out to these leaders. And Johnson continued these policies after the trauma of Kennedy's November '63 assassination, but they fell by the wayside. Johnson could only partly appreciate the rationale behind this, and soon this became a memory, a distant memory, as Vietnam and other various foreign policy disasters befell us in the mid to late 1960s. In the first place, colonial conflicts continued to blossom during the 1960s. Most of the world had become decolonized by this point in time, but by no means all of it, and some of the colonial powers were still very reluctant to let go, Portugal especially. Secondly, there were regional conflicts, familiar ones like the Arab-Israeli and Indo-Pakistani conflict, but also ones that thankfully we've had the opportunity to forget, such as in the case of Indonesia and Malaysia. Kennedy and Johnson found that the politics of foreign aid were actually quite slippery and quite difficult, putting them on the one hand afoul of domestic constituencies, or on the other afoul of aid recipients. And finally, of course, Vietnam by '64 and '65 cast an increasing shadow over all these other efforts by the United States to cast itself as a friendly elder brother to the post-colonial world. I think understanding how to deal with states that have not fully aligned with you is one of the great challenges of international relations. And Americans who are still very reflexively prone to dividing the world into categories of friend and foe need to grasp the ways by which states in that middle category, states that decline to state that they're friend or foe, the ways by which these states can be placated, can be wooed over gradually. It's a challenge, and it's not easy work, and it's often unrewarding, but I think it's necessary. I think the end of the Cold War has actually, in some ways, made things more difficult for us to grasp the nature of power and influence in the world. It has allowed us to cast ourselves a little bit too effortlessly as victor, to reimagine the Cold War in a very stark and moralistic light, which, yes, we should all be happy that the Soviet Union is no more, and that communism no longer shapes the lives of the people that it did during those years. But at the same time, that shouldn't blind us to the fact that the Cold War was, for the vast majority of people who experienced it directly, a miserable affair, and one which continues to hobble and limit their hopes and dreams. And there are chastening lessons as well as reasons to pat ourselves on the back. There's an added benefit also from studying the United States while outside of it. I like to think that you pick up a bit on the nature of power when you're in a relatively small country, as opposed to the United States, that's just a few hundred miles south of Asia, that you understand a bit more of the way that other states experience the world environment.